Stop him. If that man crosses this barricade, people could die. The command rang across the smoke-filled entrance of M&T Bank Stadium only minutes after a deafening explosion had turned a packed Sunday afternoon into confusion. Red and blue emergency lights flashed across shattered glass, twisted railings, and drifting clouds of gray dust as hundreds of frightened spectators poured toward the exits. Sirens echoed from every direction, helicopters circled overhead, and television cameras captured every second of the unfolding emergency. In the middle of the chaos, Dr. Marcus Carter sprinted toward the restricted gate, his navy trauma jacket half-zipped over dark blue scrubs, a medical backpack bouncing against his shoulder with every stride. Sweat rolled down his forehead despite the cool Baltimore air as he raised one hand high. "Trauma physician! Let me through!" he shouted, his voice carrying over the blaring sirens. Before he could reach the opening, two white security officers stepped directly into his path, while a third stretched out an arm to block him. "Stop right there," one officer barked. "This area is restricted." Marcus barely slowed. "People are trapped inside. Every minute matters." "Identification," the officer demanded. Marcus reached toward his jacket. "I'll show you everything once I'm inside. Right now they need trauma care." The officer shook his head. "No credentials, no entry." Behind the barricade, firefighters hurried past carrying medical bags while paramedics rushed stretchers toward the stadium tunnel. Marcus's eyes followed every movement, instinctively calculating priorities, imagining injuries, estimating how quickly victims would need surgical intervention if they were going to survive the critical golden hour. He took another step. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I'm not here to watch. I'm here to work." The taller officer planted both boots wider across the entrance. "Sir, back away." A television reporter standing only a few yards away turned toward the confrontation as her cameraman zoomed in. Emily Dawson from Channel 11 lowered the microphone slightly, surprised that the loudest argument near the emergency perimeter wasn't between fans or first responders, but between security officers and a calm black doctor refusing to leave. Marcus pulled a laminated hospital identification card from his pocket. The officer glanced at it for less than a second before handing it back. "That doesn't authorize access." Marcus clenched his jaw but kept his voice steady. "University of Maryland Shock Trauma Center. Board-certified trauma surgeon. I received the emergency dispatch." "Anyone can say that," another officer replied. "Until command confirms your status, you're staying outside." Marcus looked beyond them again. He saw frightened families embracing, volunteers carrying bottled water, and emergency crews disappearing into the smoke. Somewhere inside that concrete maze, he knew experienced trauma leadership could make the difference between organized rescue and precious minutes slipping away. He checked his watch. Less than 18 minutes had passed since the explosion. Every lesson from years in emergency medicine echoed through his mind. Time wasn't simply passing. Time was deciding outcomes. He reached into his pocket for his phone and opened the emergency deployment notification that had arrived while he was driving home after finishing a 14-hour shift. The official message displayed the federal seal and one unmistakable instruction ordering him to report immediately as part of the state's emergency trauma response. Marcus held the screen toward the officers. One barely glanced at it before folding his arms. "Digital messages don't prove anything." Marcus inhaled slowly, forcing himself to remain composed. "Call incident command. Verify my assignment. It'll take less than a minute. Until then," the officer answered, "you're not going anywhere." Emily exchanged a quick glance with her cameraman. "Keep rolling," she whispered. "Don't cut away." None of them realized that millions of Americans would soon watch the next few minutes frame by frame, wondering how the one doctor desperate to run toward danger became the only person ordered to stay behind. Marcus Carter had learned long before medical school that the fastest way to earn respect was never by asking for it. It was by staying calm when everyone else was losing control. That lesson had followed him from the narrow brick row house where he grew up on the west side of Baltimore to the bright operating rooms of the University of Maryland Shock Trauma Center. His mother, Angela Carter, had spent 32 years driving a city bus before retiring, and every morning she reminded him of the same simple truth. Your name walks into every room before you do. Make sure it stands tall. His father had served as a firefighter until a back injury forced an early retirement, teaching Marcus that running toward danger was never about bravery alone. It was about responsibility. Those lessons shaped every decision he made. By the age of 34, Marcus had become one of the youngest trauma surgeons trusted to lead emergency surgical teams during large-scale disasters. His colleagues admired him because he never raised his voice inside the trauma bay, even when seconds separated life from loss. Nurses often joked that Marcus had the calmest heartbeat in the entire hospital. During one record-breaking winter storm, he coordinated 6 emergency surgeries in less than 5 hours, without once allowing panic to spread through the operating room. Hospital administrators noticed. State emergency officials noticed. Eventually, federal emergency planners noticed as well. Months before the stadium disaster, Marcus completed advanced disaster command training alongside emergency physicians, firefighters, and aviation rescue teams from across the country. While others viewed it as another certification, Marcus treated every exercise like real life. Every simulation ended the same way in his mind. Someone's family would eventually depend on the decisions he practiced today. Earlier that Sunday, he had finally finished a grueling 14-hour shift just after noon. His shoulders ached beneath the weight of exhaustion as he stepped outside the hospital carrying nothing more than a coffee that had long gone cold. He had barely settled into the driver's seat of his dark gray pickup truck when his emergency response phone vibrated across the center console. The notification displayed an immediate statewide activation. Mass casualty incident. Baltimore. Respond without delay. Marcus did not hesitate. He turned the key, merged back onto the highway, and headed straight toward the stadium without stopping to change clothes or return home. During the drive, he contacted the hospital's emergency coordination desk. "Dr. Carter responding," he said. "Estimated arrival?" the dispatcher asked. 12 minutes, if traffic cooperates." "Understood. Additional command assignments are still being finalized. Proceed directly to the incident." Marcus acknowledged the transmission and focused on the road ahead. Even from several miles away, he could already see helicopters crossing the skyline. Thick gray smoke drifted above downtown Baltimore like a storm cloud refusing to move. As he approached the perimeter, abandoned vehicles lined the streets, while police redirected traffic away from the stadium. Marcus parked nearly half a mile away and grabbed the trauma backpack that never left his truck. Inside were emergency airway tools, surgical gloves, portable ultrasound equipment, and supplies he personally replaced every month. He ran the remaining distance, weaving past anxious families and volunteers searching for loved ones. Along the sidewalks, strangers comforted one another with blankets and bottled water. Some quietly prayed. Others stared toward the stadium without saying a word. Marcus understood that fear often sounded exactly like silence. Now, standing only yards from the barricade, he watched precious minutes disappear while radios crackled around him. The emergency crews inside were undoubtedly doing everything they could, but without coordinated trauma, leadership the entire operation risked becoming slower than it needed to be. He looked once more toward the smoke rising above the upper seating deck before turning back to the officers blocking his path. His expression remained steady, but his eyes revealed growing urgency. "Please," he said one more time, speaking with quiet conviction instead of anger. "I am exactly where I was trained to be. Let me do my job." Lieutenant Ethan Brooks adjusted the radio clipped to his tactical vest without taking his eyes off Marcus. At 46 years old, Brooks had spent nearly 2 decades managing security for large public events across Maryland. He believed discipline solved every crisis, and following procedure had become second nature. Around him, officers moved barricades, redirected emergency vehicles, and cleared pathways for rescue crews entering the stadium. Every few seconds, another radio call interrupted the air with overlapping instructions, making it nearly impossible to distinguish one command from another. "No unauthorized personnel beyond Gate 3. A dispatcher repeated through the static. Brooks answered immediately. "Gate 3 secure." He glanced back at Marcus. "You heard the order." Marcus nodded calmly. "I also heard multiple requests for additional trauma leadership." Brooks folded his arms. "That decision belongs to Incident Command, not to you." Emily Dawson remained several feet away, microphone lowered, quietly observing the exchange while her cameraman continued recording. She had covered hurricanes, building fires, and election nights. But something about this conversation refused to let her look away. The doctor standing outside the barricade was not shouting. He was not arguing. He simply looked like a man watching time disappear 1 minute at a time. Suddenly, a paramedic rushed out from inside the perimeter carrying an empty trauma bag. "We need another surgical team inside," he shouted toward the command vehicles before disappearing again without noticing Marcus standing only a few yards away. Marcus instinctively stepped forward. "I am a trauma surgeon." Brooks extended one arm across the entrance. "Stay where you are." Marcus took a slow breath. "Ask that paramedic who they are waiting for." Brooks remained unmoved. "My responsibility is this gate, and mine is the patients inside." The two men stood face to face, separated by only a few feet but by completely different responsibilities. Around them, the emergency scene continued to grow louder. Additional ambulances rolled into position. Fire engines lined the outer roadway. Volunteer nurses unloaded medical supplies beneath temporary floodlights, even though the afternoon sun had not yet disappeared. The smell of smoke still drifted through the cool air, while helicopters circled above the stadium searching for a safe landing pattern. Emily quietly asked the cameraman, "Are we still live?" He checked his monitor and nodded. The station never cut away. Thousands of viewers across Maryland were now watching the confrontation unfold in real time. Comments flooded social media questioning why a doctor wearing hospital scrubs remained outside the emergency perimeter while rescue crews continued rushing inside. Marcus's emergency phone vibrated again. He looked at the screen and immediately answered. "Dr. Carter speaking." A strained voice came through the speaker. "Doctor, where are you?" "Outside the north entrance." "Have you checked in with command?" "Security will not allow me through." There was a brief silence. "Stay on the line." Marcus lowered the phone slightly as the call transferred. Brooks watched him carefully. "Who is that?" Marcus answered honestly. "Emergency coordination." Brooks shook his head. "Until I receive confirmation through my chain of command, nothing changes." Marcus did not argue. He simply looked toward the stadium entrance where another wave of first responders disappeared into the smoke. He quietly calculated the passing minutes once more. 24 minutes since the initial explosion. The window for rapid trauma intervention was growing smaller. A young firefighter jogging past slowed just long enough to glance at Marcus's scrubs. "Doctor, are you coming?" Before Marcus could answer, Brooks spoke first. "Negative. He has not been cleared." The firefighter looked confused for a moment before hurrying inside without another word. Emily noticed Marcus close his eyes briefly, not in frustration but in restraint. When he opened them again, his voice remained steady. "Lieutenant Brooks, I respect your responsibility. I truly do. But procedures exist to protect lives, not delay the people trained to save them." Brooks looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "And if I make the wrong decision, every person standing behind me pays the price." Neither man realized that only a few blocks away, a command center computer had just finished verifying a name that would change everything within the next few minutes. The radio on Lieutenant Ethan Brooks's shoulder suddenly crackled with overlapping voices, each one fighting to be heard over the noise surrounding the command post. "North entrance. Status update." Brooks immediately pressed the transmit button. "North entrance secure. Unauthorized individual requesting medical access remains outside the perimeter." Marcus lowered his phone after hearing only one sentence from the emergency coordinator before the line unexpectedly disconnected. Cellular networks around the stadium had become overloaded, leaving thousands of calls competing for limited bandwidth. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked toward the stadium tunnel once again. A pair of paramedics hurried out, pushing an empty stretcher toward a waiting ambulance before immediately turning around and running back inside. Marcus noticed the uncertainty in their movements. They were working hard, but there was no clear rhythm. Teams crossed each other's paths. Supplies were being carried in different directions. Precious seconds vanished with every hesitation. "Lieutenant," Marcus said quietly, "they are still organizing triage inside." Brooks did not answer immediately. He continued watching the entrance while monitoring 3 different radio channels at once. "That is not your concern." Marcus nodded slightly. "It is exactly my concern." Before Brooks could respond, A frightened man rushed toward the barricade, holding the hand of a teenage girl whose face was covered with gray dust from the collapsing concrete. "Please," the father pleaded. "Somebody told us the medical station moved. Where do we go?" Brooks pointed toward a temporary treatment tent, nearly 100 yards away. "Follow the blue signs." Marcus immediately noticed the girl's breathing becoming faster as she struggled to remain calm. He knelt several feet away without crossing the barricade. "Hey," he said gently, keeping his voice soft enough to lower her anxiety instead of adding to it. "Look at me for just a second. Can you tell me your name?" "Olivia," she answered quietly. "Good job, Olivia. Take one slow breath with me." She copied his breathing almost instinctively. "That is perfect," Marcus smiled. "Your father is taking you exactly where you need to go. Stay with him." The girl's breathing steadied within moments. Her father looked back with grateful eyes before guiding her toward the medical tent. Emily Dawson had watched the entire interaction through her camera lens. She quietly whispered to her producer through her earpiece. "That doctor just calmed her faster than anyone else on scene." The producer replied, "Stay with him. Something about this story feels important." Only seconds later, another emergency vehicle arrived, carrying additional physicians from nearby hospitals. Brooks checked each identification badge carefully before allowing them through. Marcus watched without complaint until the last physician entered the stadium. "Doctor," Brooks finally said, "you have been patient. I respect that, but I still cannot make exceptions." Marcus answered without raising his voice. "I am not asking for an exception. I am asking you to verify the assignment." Brooks sighed. Verification requests are already backed up. Marcus glanced toward the command trailers parked beyond the gate. "Then let me walk with an escort." "Negative. Send someone to confirm my credentials." "Negative. Call the emergency coordinator again." Brooks hesitated for only a moment before replying, "Negative." Emily slowly lowered her microphone. Even she could hear the growing frustration in nearby first responders who continued asking for additional surgical leadership over the radio. A young emergency nurse passing through the checkpoint suddenly looked at Marcus's hospital identification clipped to his jacket. Her eyes widened with recognition. "Dr. Carter?" she asked. Marcus turned toward her. "Yes, I know you from shock trauma." She smiled briefly before Brooks stepped between them. "Keep moving, nurse." She looked from Brooks back to Marcus, clearly confused. "He is one of the best trauma surgeons." "Move," Brooks repeated firmly. The nurse reluctantly continued inside, shaking her head as she disappeared into the tunnel. Marcus watched her leave before quietly speaking again. "Lieutenant, your own people are beginning to recognize me." Brooks remained silent, but for the first time uncertainty crossed his face. Just then, every radio within 20 feet suddenly emitted the same sharp alert tone. A command priority transmission interrupted every other channel. Officers, firefighters, and paramedics instinctively stopped talking. The dispatcher spoke with unmistakable urgency. "Attention all command units. Stand by for immediate identification update regarding incoming medical branch leadership. Repeat, stand by for immediate identification update." Every radio fell silent for less than 2 seconds before the command frequency erupted again, with overlapping reports from inside the stadium. Medical teams are requesting additional trauma coordination at the East Tunnel. Supply units need routing confirmation. Ambulance staging is reaching capacity. The voices came one after another, each carrying the unmistakable strain of professionals trying to solve too many problems at once. Marcus listened carefully without interrupting. Years of disaster response training allowed him to hear the pattern hidden beneath the noise. The responders were skilled. They simply lacked one unified medical command, directing the flow of patients, equipment, and transportation. He looked at Lieutenant Ethan Brooks with the same calm expression he had worn since arriving. "They do not need more people," Marcus said quietly. "They need one medical plan." Brooks kept his attention on the radio in his hand, but his jaw tightened. "Command is handling it." Marcus nodded respectfully. "I hope they are." Another ambulance pulled to the curb with its emergency lights reflecting across the stadium walls. A group of volunteer nurses unloaded sealed medical containers while firefighters rolled additional stretchers toward the entrance. Everyone was moving quickly, yet several teams stopped repeatedly to ask where they should report. One firefighter approached Brooks. "Lieutenant, do we send these supplies to the North Tunnel or the West Medical Station?" Brooks hesitated for a brief moment while listening to another transmission. "Stand by." The firefighter waited several seconds before another radio message interrupted again. "Lieutenant?" "Stand by," Brooks repeated. Marcus watched the exchange with growing concern. Every delayed answer created another delay somewhere else. A young paramedic hurried through the checkpoint carrying a portable cardiac monitor before suddenly stopping. "Does anyone know where Trauma Team 3 relocated?" he asked. No one answered immediately. Two officers pointed in different directions. The paramedic looked uncertain before choosing one path and running away. Marcus quietly closed his eyes for a single breath. When he opened them again, he spoke just loudly enough for Brooks to hear. "That uncertainty spreads faster than smoke." Brooks remained silent. Emily Dawson noticed the change in his expression. Confidence had slowly been replaced by doubt. Her cameraman continued recording every conversation without saying a word. Nearby, a gray-haired volunteer approached the barricade carrying a box of bottled water. "Can I leave these for the responders?" she asked. Brooks thanked her and directed another officer to distribute them. Marcus accepted one bottle when it was offered to him. He twisted off the cap but only took a single sip before setting it on the concrete beside his medical backpack. He had no appetite, no thirst, only an unwavering focus on the people waiting beyond the gate. His emergency phone vibrated once again. This time, the screen displayed an incoming secure government number. Marcus answered immediately. "Dr. Carter." The connection broke into static before a voice finally became clear. "Doctor, we have confirmed your deployment. Incident Command has." The line suddenly cut out again. Marcus lowered the phone slowly. Brooks noticed. "Bad connection?" Marcus nodded. "The network is overloaded." Brooks glanced toward the command trailers only a short distance away. For the first time since the confrontation began, he appeared genuinely conflicted. His responsibility demanded caution, yet every passing minute seemed to support the doctor's warnings. Another officer approached Brooks at a brisk pace. "Lieutenant, social media is exploding. The live broadcast is everywhere. People are asking why a trauma surgeon is still outside." Brooks frowned. "Public opinion does not determine security." "No, sir," the officer replied carefully. "But headquarters is asking questions now." Emily quietly adjusted her microphone. The atmosphere around the checkpoint had changed. The argument was no longer simply between one doctor and one security officer. Everyone nearby sensed that an important decision was approaching. Marcus looked beyond the barricade once more, his eyes following the stream of first responders disappearing into the stadium. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. "Lieutenant, I know you are trying to protect this scene. I respect that more than you realize. But the people inside do not know our names. They only know whether help reaches them in time." Brooks looked directly at Marcus but said nothing. At that exact moment, the door of the largest command trailer swung open, and Captain Sarah Collins stepped outside holding a tablet in one hand and a printed deployment packet in the other. She scanned the crowd with unmistakable urgency before calling out in a clear, commanding voice, "Where is Dr. Marcus Carter?" Captain Sarah Collins stood at the edge of the command trailer, the afternoon wind moving through the emergency flags behind her as dozens of responders turned toward her voice. She was known throughout Maryland emergency services as someone who rarely raised her voice because she believed clear decisions carried more authority than volume. Her eyes moved from the officers at the gate to Marcus standing outside the barrier. For a brief moment, the entire area seemed to slow down. The radios continued speaking. Ambulances continued arriving. The stadium lights continued flashing against the growing evening sky. But everyone nearby was watching the same moment. "Dr. Marcus Carter?" Sarah called again. Marcus stepped forward. "Yes, Captain." Sarah looked down at the tablet in her hand, then back at him. "Why are you standing outside the perimeter?" Before Marcus could answer, Lieutenant Ethan Brooks spoke. "Captain," he approached the restricted area without prior confirmation. "We are still verifying his credentials." Sarah looked at Brooks carefully. "Verifying?" she repeated. "Lieutenant, how long has Dr. Carter been waiting?" Brooks glanced at his watch. Approximately 30 minutes. A quiet tension spread across the faces of the responders nearby. Sarah slowly turned toward Marcus. 30 minutes? Marcus nodded once. Yes, ma'am. And you have been requesting entry this entire time? Yes. Ma'am. Sarah looked back at Brooks. Did you contact medical command? Brooks opened his mouth but paused. We attempted communication. The network has been unstable. Sarah held up the deployment packet in her hand. The network is unstable, but this document reached my command system 12 minutes ago. She opened the folder and removed a printed page. The paper moved slightly in the wind as she held it up. Dr. Marcus Carter, University of Maryland Shock Trauma Center. Assigned by the State Emergency Medical Coordination Office as temporary medical branch director for this incident. The words traveled through the checkpoint like a sudden change in weather. Several responders exchanged surprised looks. Emily Dawson lowered her microphone slightly, her expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. Brooks stared at the document, then at Marcus. Medical branch director? He asked quietly. Sarah nodded. Yes. The person responsible for coordinating emergency medical operations across all responding medical teams. Marcus did not react with anger or satisfaction. He simply looked toward the stadium entrance. Captain, we can discuss the paperwork later. Right now, teams need direction. That answer surprised everyone more than the document itself. There was no accusation in his voice, no desire to embarrass anyone, only urgency. Sarah immediately stepped aside. Then take command. Marcus entered the restricted area for the first time. The same officers who had blocked his path moments earlier now moved aside without a word. The cameras captured every step as he crossed the barrier carrying the same medical backpack he had been holding since he arrived. Inside the stadium access area, the atmosphere changed instantly. Responders approached him with questions. Doctor, where should we send incoming patients? Who is coordinating the specialty teams? Do we move the temporary treatment area closer to the east side? Marcus listened carefully before answering. His voice remained calm and controlled. First, establish one communication channel. Second, separate transportation routes from supply routes. Third, every team needs one clear destination. The confusion that had filled the radios moments earlier began to settle into organized movement. Sarah watched from a few steps away. She had seen experienced leaders before, but Marcus carried something different. He did not command because he wanted people to notice him. He commanded because people needed someone to make decisions. Brooks remained near the entrance, silent. He watched as the doctor he had stopped became the person everyone was turning toward for answers. Emily continued recording. Her cameraman whispered, "This is not just a rescue story anymore." She looked at the monitors showing Marcus directing teams beneath the stadium lights. "No," she replied softly. "It is a story about who people choose to believe before they know the truth." Marcus looked once toward the entrance where Brooks still stood. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Marcus gave a small nod, not as a victory, but as a reminder that the work ahead mattered more than what had already happened. Then he turned back toward the emergency teams and began leading the operation that would change the outcome for everyone inside the stadium. Marcus Carter stepped beyond the checkpoint and immediately felt the difference between standing outside and being responsible for everything happening inside. The noise did not disappear, but it became organized. Radios still crackled. Footsteps still moved quickly across the concrete floor. Emergency lights still reflected against the stadium walls. But now every question had a direction, every team had a purpose, and every decision had a reason behind it. Marcus walked toward the temporary command area where maps of the stadium were spread across folding tables. Captain Sarah Collins followed closely, watching as he studied the information in front of him. "Give me the situation," Marcus said. A coordinator pointed toward the digital display. Multiple treatment areas established. Several teams are operating independently. Transportation routes are getting crowded. Marcus nodded slowly. "We need one flow. No confusion between assessment, treatment, and transport." He picked up a marker and began making adjustments on the stadium map. Move communication leads to this location. Create one central reporting point. Every team checks in through one channel. A firefighter looked at the map and asked, "Doctor, should we separate teams by department?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. separate by function. Emergencies do not care which uniform someone wears. They care whether the right person reaches the right place. The firefighter nodded immediately and moved to carry out the instruction. Sarah watched the responders follow Marcus without hesitation. 10 minutes earlier, some people questioned whether he belonged behind the gate. Now those same people were asking for his guidance. Near the entrance, Lieutenant Ethan Brooks remained still, observing the transformation from a distance. He watched as the doctor he had stopped became the center of coordination. He noticed something that bothered him. Marcus never once mentioned what happened at the gate. He never criticized him. He never demanded an apology. He simply focused on the mission. Emily Dawson continued filming from the approved media area. Her camera captured the moment when Marcus paused beside a young volunteer who appeared overwhelmed by the scale of the emergency response. "Take a breath," Marcus told him. "You are doing fine. Find your assignment, trust your training, and keep moving." The volunteer nodded, visibly calmer. "Thank you, Doctor." Marcus returned to the command table. Sarah looked at him quietly. "You are not angry?" she asked. Marcus glanced at her. "About what?" She hesitated. "About being kept outside." Marcus looked through the stadium entrance toward the city lights beyond the open doors. "Captain, people make decisions based on what they know at the moment. The important thing is what we do after we learn more." Sarah studied his expression. She had expected frustration. She found patience instead. Inside the stadium, the operation continued improving. Teams reported more efficiently. Supplies reached the correct locations faster. Communication became clearer. The uncertainty that had slowed the response began disappearing. Brooks eventually approached the command area. He stopped a few feet away, unsure whether he should interrupt. Marcus noticed him first. "Lieutenant." Brooks straightened slightly. "Dr. Carter." For a moment, neither man spoke. The sounds of the emergency response filled the space between them. Finally, Brooks said, "I made a judgment based on the information I had." Marcus nodded. "I understand." Brooks looked down briefly. "I should have verified sooner." Marcus held his gaze. "Verification matters. So does listening." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Brooks nodded slowly. "Understood." Then Marcus turned back toward the command table. The moment passed without a dramatic speech or public confrontation. It was simply two people recognizing what had happened and choosing to move forward. Outside the stadium, the live broadcast continued, showing images from the emergency scene. Across Maryland, viewers who had watched Marcus being denied entry were now watching the same man coordinate the response with calm precision. Emily looked at her monitor and saw thousands of comments appearing beneath the broadcast. People were no longer asking who he was. They were asking how someone they had underestimated became the person everyone depended on. Inside the stadium, Marcus placed the marker down and looked at the updated operation map. There was still work to do. More decisions needed to be made. More lives needed attention. He adjusted his sleeves, picked up his radio, and said the words every responder needed to hear. "All teams, stay focused. We are not finished yet." The stadium slowly began to change from a place of confusion into a place of coordination. The same concrete corridors that had felt chaotic less than an hour earlier now carried a different rhythm. Responders moved with purpose. Communication became clearer. Every team understood where they needed to be and what they needed to do. At the center of it all stood Marcus Carter, still wearing the same Navy trauma jacket he had arrived in. The fabric marked by long hours of work, but his focus unchanged. Captain Sarah Collins watched him review the latest updates coming through the command system. "Dr. Carter, the situation reports are improving," she said. Marcus nodded. "Good. Keep the communication lines open. The first mistake in any emergency is assuming the problem is already solved." Sarah smiled slightly. "You always think 10 steps ahead?" Marcus looked at the stadium map in front of him. "No. I just remember that every person affected by this is someone's family." A few feet away, Lieutenant Ethan Brooks stood quietly beside the entrance. The sounds around him were the same sounds he had heard all day, but his perspective had changed completely. He looked at the cameras that had recorded the earlier confrontation. He knew the footage was already spreading across the country. Millions of people had seen him block Marcus from entering. But what stayed with him most was not the public attention. It was the fact that Marcus never used the moment to make him look small. He had every opportunity to embarrass him. He chose not to. Brooks finally walked toward Marcus again. "Dr. Carter." Marcus turned. "Yes, Lieutenant?" Brooks removed his security badge from his vest for a moment, not as a gesture of authority, but as a sign that he was speaking personally. "I owe you an apology." Marcus remained quiet. Brooks continued. "I saw a person asking to enter a restricted area. I focused on the rule, and not the reason behind it. I should have taken more time to verify who you were." The nearby responders slowed slightly, noticing the conversation. Marcus looked at Brooks for several seconds before answering. "You were responsible for protecting the scene. That matters." Brooks nodded. "But protecting a scene also means recognizing the people who are there to help." Marcus gave a small nod. "That is true." Brooks looked toward the stadium entrance. "I hope you know that I do respect what you do," Marcus replied softly. "Respect grows when we are willing to learn from the moments when we are wrong." The conversation ended there. No applause, no dramatic announcement. Just two people standing in the middle of a difficult day, understanding something they had not understood before. Outside the stadium, Emily Dawson prepared her final live report. The camera light turned on as she stood near the emergency perimeter. "Tonight, people across Maryland watched a moment that raised difficult questions," she said. "A doctor arrived ready to help and was initially denied access. But after his credentials were confirmed, the same doctor became the person leading medical coordination inside this stadium." She paused and looked toward the entrance where Marcus continued working. "The most important part of this story is not that someone was underestimated. It is what happened afterward. When given the opportunity, Dr. Marcus Carter did not respond with anger. He responded with service." Inside the command area, Marcus heard part of the broadcast through a nearby television monitor but quickly turned his attention back to his team. A young nurse approached him with an update. "Dr. Carter, the families in the waiting area are asking for information." Marcus nodded. "Then we make sure they receive it. Clear communication is part of care." Hours later, as the evening sky settled over Baltimore, the emergency response entered its final phase. The bright lights around the stadium reflected against the wet pavement outside. Marcus finally stepped away from the command table for a moment. He looked across the field and saw responders, volunteers, and medical teams standing together. Different uniforms, different backgrounds, one purpose. Sarah walked beside him. "You know this story will follow you for a long time." Marcus looked toward the stadium seats. "I hope people remember the lesson, not the person," Sarah asked. "And what lesson is that?" Marcus answered quietly. "Never decide someone's value before you understand their purpose." The cameras continued recording as Marcus returned to his team. The same man who had once been told to stop was now the person everyone trusted to lead. And the silence that followed carried something stronger than recognition. It carried respect. The first light of morning reached Baltimore slowly, spreading across the skyline as the emergency vehicles began leaving the streets around the stadium. The flashing lights that had filled the night faded one by one, replaced by the quiet sounds of cleanup crews, volunteers, and responders finishing their final responsibilities. For the first time in hours, M&T Bank Stadium felt still. Marcus Carter stood near the entrance where everything had started. His medical backpack rested beside him, the same one he had carried when he arrived, before anyone knew his name. He looked across the empty space where the barricade had stood and remembered the moment when he was told to stop. But the memory no longer carried anger. It carried understanding. Captain Sarah Collins walked toward him holding a cup of coffee. "You finally stopped moving," she said with a small smile. Marcus accepted the coffee, only for a minute. Sarah looked toward the stadium. "You realize your story is everywhere now." Marcus glanced at her. "I was not trying to become a story." "I know," Sarah replied. "That is exactly why people are paying attention." A few yards away, Emily Dawson reviewed the footage from her camera with her producer. The images showed the entire journey of the day. Marcus arriving with determination. Marcus standing outside the gate. Marcus entering the emergency area. Marcus guiding teams with calm confidence. But the most powerful moments were not the loud ones. They were the quiet moments. The way he listened before speaking. The way he thanked every volunteer. The way he treated every person around him with the same respect, regardless of their position. Later that morning, Emily approached Marcus outside the stadium. "Dr. Carter, do you have a moment?" Marcus smiled politely. "Sure." She held her microphone carefully. "Many people watched what happened at the entrance yesterday. They saw you being questioned. They saw the misunderstanding. They also saw how you responded afterward. What do you want people to remember?" Marcus looked past the camera toward the city streets of Baltimore. For a moment, he said nothing. The sounds of traffic moved around them. A light breeze passed through the trees nearby. Finally, he answered, "I want people to remember that emergencies do not ask who you are before they need your help." Emily listened carefully. "What does that mean?" Marcus continued. "It means skill, compassion, and dedication can come from anyone. Sometimes the person standing beside you is the person who can make the biggest difference." Emily lowered the microphone slightly. "Do you think yesterday changed anything?" Marcus looked down at his hands, the same hands that had spent years helping patients through difficult moments. "I think every moment teaches us something. The question is whether we are willing to learn." Across the parking area, Lieutenant Ethan Brooks watched the interview from a distance. He had spent the night thinking about every decision he made. Not because someone forced him to, not because cameras were watching, because he realized that a quick assumption could prevent someone from seeing the value standing right in front of them. He approached Marcus one final time before leaving. "Dr. Carter." Marcus turned. "Lieutenant." Brooks extended his hand. "I hope the next time we meet, it is under better circumstances." Marcus shook his hand. "I hope so too." Brooks paused. "Thank you for what you did yesterday." Marcus nodded. "Thank you for being willing to understand afterward." The two men separated quietly. There was no need for a crowd, no need for a speech. Some moments were powerful because they happened without an audience. As Marcus walked toward his truck, the morning sunlight reflected against the stadium windows. He stopped for a second and looked back at the building that had witnessed a difficult lesson. The world had seen someone judge him before knowing him. Then the world had seen him answer with patience, knowledge, and service. His phone vibrated with a message from the hospital asking when he would return. Marcus smiled slightly. He typed a simple reply, "Soon. There is still work to do." Then he stepped into the morning light and drove back toward the place where he had always belonged. Not because people finally recognized his title, not because cameras had captured his actions, but because helping others had never depended on being seen. It had always depended on showing up. And sometimes, the strongest response to being underestimated was simply proving who you were through what you did.